The wind screamed through the Colorado mountains that January night in 1882. And when Zachary Wolfe heard the desperate pounding on his cabin door, he knew whoever stood on the other side wouldn't last another hour in the blizzard that had been raging for 2 full days. He pushed away from the fireplace, where he had been stretching his massive frame after spending the day chopping wood, his thick, dark hair falling past his shoulders as he moved with surprising speed for a man of his size. The muscles in his arms flexed as he threw open the heavy door, and the sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat, despite years of mountain solitude hardening him to most everything. A woman collapsed forward into his arms, her lips blue, ice crystals clinging to her dark blonde hair, and her hands clutched against her chest in a way that told him she had been trying to preserve whatever warmth remained in her body. Her green eyes flickered open for just a moment before rolling back, and Zachary caught her weight easily against his broad chest, kicking the door shut behind him with his boot. "Jesus," he muttered, carrying her immediately to the fire. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel how her whole body trembled with violent shivers. He laid her down on the thick bearskin rug in front of the flames and quickly began assessing the damage. Her coat was thin, far too thin for this high up in the Rockies, and when he carefully peeled back her gloves, his jaw clenched at what he saw. Her fingers were bone white, waxy looking, and when he touched them gently they were hard as stone. Frostbite. Severe frostbite. He had seen men lose fingers to less. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his deep voice softer than it had been in months. Living alone on this mountain meant he rarely spoke to anyone, making the trip down to Rock Springs only when supplies ran critically low. The woman's eyelids fluttered. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please help me." "I have got you," Zachary said, already moving into action. He had dealt with frostbite before, knew that warming the affected areas too quickly near the fire would cause more damage. He needed to warm her fingers gradually, carefully. He pulled off his own wool shirt, leaving him in just his undershirt, and wrapped it around her body, then grabbed every blanket he owned from his bed. But her fingers needed special attention. He had learned from an old trapper years ago that the best way to warm frostbitten extremities was with body heat, gradual and constant. Without hesitation, Zachary positioned himself beside her on the bearskin rug and carefully took her right hand between both of his palms. His hands were huge, calloused from years of hard work, and they completely engulfed her smaller, delicate hand. He began to rub gently, not too hard, just enough to encourage circulation without damaging the frozen tissue. Her hand was so cold it almost hurt to touch, but he kept his palms pressed firmly around it, using his body heat to slowly, carefully bring warmth back into her fingers. The woman's eyes opened again, this time staying focused on him. Even in her state of distress, he could see they were a striking shade of green, like the pine needles after a summer rain. "My other hand," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "One at a time," Zachary said. "I need to do this slow or you will lose these fingers. What is your name?" "Grace," she whispered. "Grace Carlisle. Zachary Wolfe. You are safe now, Grace. I'm going to take care of you, but you need to stay awake. Talk to me. How did you end up on my mountain in the middle of a blizzard?" Grace's whole body shook with shivers despite the blankets and his shirt wrapped around her. Stage robbery. 3 days ago, they took everything. I ran, got lost, so cold." Zachary felt anger burn in his chest at the thought of someone robbing a stage and leaving a woman to die in these mountains. "Where were you headed?" "Rock Springs," she said, her teeth still chattering. "My aunt lives there. Letter said, come live with her. Parents died. Cholera. Nothing left. In Kansas." He kept her right hand pressed between his palms, feeling the gradual change in temperature. It would take hours, he knew, maybe all night, but he would not stop until he was certain her fingers could be saved. "I am sorry about your parents. Rock Springs is about 15 miles down the mountain, but you went north instead of south. These mountains will kill you if you do not know them." "Thought I was going to die," Grace admitted, and he saw tears freeze at the corners of her eyes. "So cold, could not feel anything, then I saw your light, thought I was dreaming." "You are not dreaming," Zachary assured her. His thumb moved gently across her palm, feeling for any sign of returning circulation. "And you are not going to die, but you need to stay awake, keep talking to me." Over the next hours, as the blizzard continued to howl outside and the fire crackled beside them, Grace told him her story in fragmented pieces between shivers and moments, when the pain of her fingers warming became too intense for her to speak. She was 22 years old, had lost both parents within weeks of each other to the cholera outbreak that had torn through their small Kansas town last fall. Her Aunt Martha, her mother's sister, had written to her offering a home in Rock Springs where she ran a boarding house. Grace had sold everything she owned to afford the stage ticket west, carrying with her only one small trunk of belongings and the little money she had left. The robbery had happened just as they were climbing into the mountain passes. 3 masked men had stopped the stage, taken everything of value, and when the driver had tried to resist, they had shot him. The other passengers, 2 men traveling to a silver mine, had been forced to strip to their underclothes and walk back down the mountain. But Grace they had left with the stage, the horses unhitched and scattered. "I waited for someone to come," she said, her voice stronger now after Zachary had managed to get some warm broth into her. He was still working on her right hand, had been for 3 hours, and was finally beginning to feel the fingers soften slightly under his palms. But no one came. "I knew I would freeze if I stayed with the stage, so I took what I could carry and started walking. I thought I knew which way to go, but everything looked the same. White, just white everywhere." Zachary listened, his face grim. "Those men are animals, leaving you like that." His hands continued their steady work, patient and careful. He had barely moved from his position beside her, his large frame curled protectively around her smaller one as he worked to save her fingers. "I think my fingers are dead," Grace said quietly, and he heard the despair in her voice. "I cannot feel them at all." "That is actually good right now," Zachary told her. "The pain comes when the blood starts flowing again, and it will hurt like nothing you have felt before. But if we can get circulation back, you will keep them. I have seen worse than this heal up fine." Grace studied his face in the firelight, really looking at him for the first time since consciousness had fully returned. He had a strong face, weathered by mountain sun and wind, with a thick beard covering his jaw and eyes that were a deep brown, almost black in the flickering light. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms thick with muscle, and his hands, despite their size and obvious strength, were being impossibly gentle with her damaged fingers. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked, needing to focus on something other than the fear of losing her fingers. Zachary was quiet for a moment, and she thought perhaps he would not answer. Then he said, "I came out here 6 years ago after the war, could not stomach being around people anymore after what I had seen. The mountain does not ask questions, does not judge, it just is. You were in the war." Grace asked, "How old are you?" 28, he replied. "Signed up when I was 18, fought for 3 years, saw things no man should see. After it ended, I just started walking west and kept going until I found this place." Grace understood that kind of pain, the need to escape. "I am sorry," she said softly. "War takes many things from people. "It does," Zachary agreed. "Then, how are you feeling? Any warmer?" "Yes," Grace said, and it was true. The violent shivers had subsided to occasional trembles, and she could feel warmth spreading through her body from the fire and blankets. "Thank you for not leaving me outside." He looked at her, and something flickered in his dark eyes. "I would never leave anyone outside in a storm like this, let alone a woman alone. You are safe here, Grace. I give you my word." Something about the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his deep voice, made Grace believe him completely. She had been so afraid for so long, first losing her parents, then the terror of the robbery and being lost in the blizzard, that she had forgotten what it felt like to feel safe. But here, in this rough cabin with this massive mountain man who was so carefully tending to her frozen fingers, she felt safer than she had in months. "I think it is time for the other hand," Zachary said after another hour. He carefully released her right hand, examining it closely in the firelight. The waxy white color had changed to a pale pink, though the fingertips were still concerning. "This one is coming along. Let me see the left." Grace extended her left hand, and when Zachary took it between his palms, she gasped at the contact. His hands were so warm, radiating heat, and the sensation of that warmth against her frozen fingers was both painful and wonderful at the same time. "That hurts," she admitted. "I know," he said gently, already beginning the same careful rubbing motion he had used on the other hand. "But pain means the nerves are still alive. That is a good thing." She watched him work, marveling at his patience. He had to be uncomfortable, sitting on the floor for hours, holding her hands between his own, never complaining, never suggesting they stop and rest. His focus was entirely on her, on saving her fingers, and Grace felt something shift in her chest as she watched him. "You are a good man, Zachary Wolfe," she said quietly. He glanced up at her, and for just a moment their eyes met and held. "Just doing what anyone would do," he replied, but his voice had gone rougher, deeper. "No," Grace said, "not anyone. Many people would have turned me away, not wanting the trouble. You have been tending to me for hours now. That is not just anyone. That is someone special." Zachary looked back down at her hand, and Grace could have sworn she saw color rise in his bearded cheeks. "Try to rest," he said gruffly. "This is going to take most of the night. I will wake you if anything changes." But Grace did not want to rest. Despite her exhaustion, she wanted to keep talking to him, wanted to know more about this solitary mountain man who had saved her life. "Tell me about your cabin," she said. "How long have you lived here?" Zachary seemed grateful for the change of subject. As he continued to work on her left hand, he told her about finding this spot 4 years ago, building the cabin himself from timber he had cut and hauled. He described the process of learning to survive on the mountain, hunting and trapping for food and furs, growing a small garden in the brief summer months, preparing obsessively for the brutal winters. "It is a hard life," he admitted, "but it is mine. No one telling me what to do, where to go, who to be, just me and the mountain, and that has been enough." "Has been," Grace caught the past tense, "but not anymore." Zachary's hands paused for just a moment in their work before resuming. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Lately I have been wondering if maybe I have been hiding up here instead of living. But then I come down to Rock Springs and remember why I left civilization behind. People are cruel, selfish. The mountain is honest at least." "Not all people are cruel," Grace said softly. "You are not cruel. My parents were not cruel. There is good in the world, even if it is sometimes hard to see." "Maybe," Zachary said, but he did not sound convinced. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, with only the sound of the fire and the wind outside. Grace found herself drifting despite her desire to stay awake, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. But every time she started to slip into sleep, pain would shoot through her fingers as circulation slowly returned, jerking her back to consciousness. "Easy," Zachary murmured each time, his voice soothing. "I know it hurts. Just breathe through it. You are doing fine." Somewhere deep in the night, Grace woke fully with a cry as intense burning pain flooded through both her hands. Zachary was ready, gently but firmly holding her hands steady as she tried to jerk them away. "I know," he said, his face close to hers now. "I know it hurts like hellfire, but this is good. This means the blood is flowing again. You have to let it happen, Grace. Just breathe, I have got you." Tears streamed down Grace's face from the pain, and without thinking, Zachary reached up with one hand to brush them away, his thumb gentle on her cheek even as his other hand maintained its hold on her left hand. "You are brave," he told her. "Braver than most men I knew in the war." "Just a little longer." Grace focused on his face, on his dark eyes that were full of concern and something else she could not quite name. She focused on the warmth of his hands, the solid strength of his presence beside her. And slowly, gradually, the burning pain began to ease into a duller ache that was bearable. "Better?" Zachary asked. "Better," Grace confirmed, her voice shaky. "I am sorry I cried." "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "I have seen grown men pass out from frostbite pain. You did well." He examined both her hands carefully, turning them gently in the firelight. Grace watched his face, seeing the concentration there, the care he was taking. His hands were so large that hers seemed to disappear inside them, and she found herself very aware of his touch, of the calluses on his palms, of the gentle strength in his fingers. "I think you are going to keep all your fingers," Zachary announced finally, and the relief in his voice was genuine. "They are going to be tender for a while, and you will need to keep them warm and protected, but I think we got to them in time. No blackening, no blisters yet. That is good." "Thank you," Grace whispered, and the words felt inadequate for what he had done. "You saved my life, and you saved my hands. How can I ever repay you?" Zachary finally released her hands, sitting back on his heels and rolling his massive shoulders to work out the stiffness from sitting in one position for so many hours. "No repayment needed," he said. "But you should try to sleep now, real sleep. The worst is over." "What about you?" Grace asked, noticing for the first time the exhaustion evident on his face. "You must be tired." "I will sleep later," he said. "Someone needs to keep the fire going, and I want to keep an eye on you. Make sure you do not develop a fever or anything else." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he needed rest too, but her body had other ideas. Now that the immediate crisis was over, the exhaustion she had been fighting for days crashed over her like a wave. Her eyelids grew heavy, and despite her best efforts, she felt herself sinking into sleep. The last thing she was aware of was Zachary gently tucking the blankets more securely around her, and the feeling of his hand briefly touching her hair before sleep claimed her completely. When Grace woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small window, and the sound of the blizzard had ceased. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, her hands throbbing with a dull ache. Then memory returned in a rush, the stage robbery, being lost in the blizzard, collapsing at Zachary's door, his hands warming hers through the long night. She sat up slowly, looking around the cabin. It was small but well built, with sturdy log walls and a stone fireplace that was still putting out good heat. There was a bed in one corner, a rough table and chairs, shelves holding supplies and equipment. Furs and hides hung from the rafters, and various tools were organized neatly along one wall. Everything spoke of a man who lived carefully, efficiently, making the most of what he had. Zachary himself was not inside. Grace stood, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders, and moved to the window. She could see him outside, splitting wood with powerful, rhythmic swings of an axe. Even from here, even bundled in his heavy coat, she could see the play of muscles in his back and arms with each movement. He moved with the confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times, and there was something almost mesmerizing about watching him work. As if sensing her gaze, Zachary looked up toward the cabin. Even at this distance, Grace felt the impact of his eyes meeting hers. He set down the axe and headed back toward the cabin, and Grace moved away from the window, suddenly self-conscious. The door opened, bringing in a blast of cold air along with Zachary. He stomped the snow from his boots and shut the door firmly behind him. "You are awake," he said, and she heard something in his voice that might have been relief. "How do you feel?" "Sore," Grace admitted. "But alive, thanks to you." She held up her hands, examining them in the daylight. Her fingers were swollen and discolored, painful to move, but she could move them, and that felt like a miracle. "You really did save them." Zachary moved to the fireplace, adding wood to build up the flames. "They are going to hurt for a while. You need to keep them warm and clean. I have some salve that will help." He glanced at her. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast." Grace realized she was starving. "Yes, please, if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble," Zachary said, and he actually smiled slightly. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, and Grace found herself smiling back. She watched as he moved around the cabin with easy efficiency, pulling out supplies, stoking up the fire in the cook stove she had not noticed the night before. He mixed up biscuit dough with hands that she now knew could be incredibly gentle, sliced thick pieces of bacon from a side hanging in the corner, and soon the cabin was filled with delicious smells that made Grace's stomach growl audibly. Zachary glanced over at the sound and smiled again. "Almost ready. Sit down at the table. You should not be on your feet too much yet." Grace obeyed, settling into one of the rough chairs. Everything in the cabin was handmade, she realized, built by Zachary's own hands. The table was solid pine, worn smooth by use. The chairs were simple but comfortable. Even the dishes he set out were carved from wood, likely by him during the long winter nights, when he placed a full plate in front of her biscuits, bacon, and even eggs from what must be chickens housed somewhere nearby. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a simple thing, a meal, but after the terror and cold and pain of the last days, it felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. Zachary sat down across from her with his own plate, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It is just food," he said gruffly. "It is more than that," Grace insisted. "You have shown me such kindness, I will never forget it." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Grace was too hungry to worry about manners. The food was simple but good, and she cleaned her plate quickly. Zachary noticed and, without a word, gave her 2 more biscuits from his own plate. "Tell me about Rock Springs," he said as they finished eating. "You said your aunt runs a boarding house there." Grace nodded, carefully holding her cup of coffee between her bandaged hands. Zachary had wrapped her fingers in clean cloth after applying a strong-smelling salve that actually did seem to help with the pain. "Yes, Martha's place, it is called. In her letters, she said it is one of the better establishments in town. She has owned it for 5 years, since her husband died." "I know the place," Zachary said. "It is respectable. Your aunt runs a good house, does not allow trouble. You will be safe there." "You know my aunt?" Grace asked, surprised. "Not personally," Zachary replied, "but I have stayed there once or twice when I was in town and the weather turned bad. She seems like a decent woman, tough but fair." Grace felt relief wash through her. She had been anxious about what awaited her in Rock Springs, whether her aunt would truly welcome her or if she would be a burden. "I hope I can help her with the boarding house, earn my keep." I do not want to be a charity case. Anyone who could survive 3 days in these mountains and keep going is no charity case, Zachary said firmly. You are stronger than you think, Grace Carlisle. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment, and she looked down at her coffee. I was terrified every moment, she admitted. I kept thinking I was going to die. Courage is not about not being afraid, Zachary said. It is about being afraid and keeping going anyway. You did that. You survived. Their eyes met across the table, and Grace felt that strange shift in her chest again, that awareness of him not just as her rescuer but as a man. A good man, strong and capable and kind despite his rough exterior and solitary life. Will you take me to Rock Springs? She asked quietly. When the weather clears, something flickered across Zachary's face, an emotion she could not quite read. Yes, he said after a moment. As soon as it is safe to travel. The blizzard has passed, but there will be deep snow. Give it 2 days for the pass to be manageable, and I will take you down to your aunt. 2 days. Grace felt an unexpected pang at the thought. She had been in this cabin less than a full day, but already she felt safe here in a way she had not felt safe since her parents died. And the thought of leaving Zachary, of never seeing him again, caused an ache that had nothing to do with her injured hands. What will you do? She asked. After you take me to Rock Springs, Zachary stood, gathering their plates. Come back here. Winter is only half done. I have traps to check, wood to chop, the usual. Alone, Grace said softly. Alone, Zachary confirmed, and his voice was carefully neutral. Grace wanted to say something, wanted to tell him he did not have to be alone, but what right did she have? She had known him for mere hours. And yet, something in her was already certain that Zachary Wolfe was the best man she had ever met. And the thought of him spending the rest of his life alone on this mountain felt wrong in a way she could not articulate. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended way. The cabin was not large, and Grace was acutely aware of Zachary's presence, always the sound of his movements, the sight of him tending the fire or preparing meals, the moments when they would accidentally brush against each other in the small space and both freeze, hyper-aware of the contact. Zachary was unfailingly polite, even chivalrous. He had insisted she take his bed while he slept on the floor by the fire, despite her protests. He checked her hands multiple times a day, rewrapping them with fresh bandages, applying more salve, his touch always gentle. He talked to her about the mountain, about tracking and hunting, about the animals that lived in these high places. Grace found herself fascinated by everything he said, by his knowledge and respect for the wild. In turn, Grace told him about her life in Kansas, about growing up on a small farm, about her parents who had loved her fiercely and taught her to read and write and think for herself. She told him about the pain of losing them, the emptiness that had followed, the feeling that she was drifting without anchor until her aunt's letter had given her a new purpose. You miss them, Zachary said. It was the evening of the second day, and they were sitting by the fire, Grace in one of the chairs and Zachary on the floor, his back against the stone hearth. Outside, the world was silent and white, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Every day, Grace admitted. My father used to say that love never dies, it just changes form. I did not understand what he meant then, but I think I am starting to. They are gone, but the love I feel for them is still here, still real. Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I lost people too, in the war. Friends who were like brothers. I thought if I came up here, if I removed myself from the world, it would hurt less. But loneliness is its own kind of pain. I just did not want to admit it. Grace's heart clenched at the raw honesty in his words. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her bandaged hand on his shoulder. Even through the cloth and his shirt, she could feel the solid warmth of him, the strength. "You do not have to be lonely," she said softly. Zachary looked up at her, and the expression in his dark eyes made her breath catch. There was longing there, and hope and fear all mixed together. "Grace," he said, and her name on his lips was almost a prayer. "Yes," she whispered. He reached up, his large hand covering hers where it rested on his shoulder. "These 2 days with you here," he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. "It has made me remember what it is like to not be alone. To hear another voice, to share meals, to have someone to talk to. And I know you are leaving tomorrow, know you need to get to your aunt, but I want you to know that meeting you has changed something for me. Reminded me that maybe I have been hiding instead of living." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What if I do not want to leave?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "What if I want to stay here with you?" Zachary stood abruptly, and for a terrible moment Grace thought she had said the wrong thing, had pushed too far. But then he was kneeling in front of her chair, his hands gently taking hers, mindful of her injured fingers. "You cannot mean that," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You do not know me, not really. I am a mountain man, a recluse. I have nothing to offer you but this rough cabin and a hard life." "You saved my life," Grace said, her eyes locked on his. "You held my hands all night to keep me from losing my fingers. You have been kind and gentle and good." "I know enough, Zachary. I know that in 2 days I have felt more alive, more safe, more seen than I have felt in months. And I know that the thought of leaving tomorrow and never seeing you again makes me want to cry." "Grace," he breathed, and this time her name was definitely a prayer. "I am not a good bet. I have demons from the war. I can go days without speaking. I am rough around the edges." "I do not care about edges," Grace said fiercely. "I care about what is inside, and what is inside you is good. I see it, Zachary, I see you." Something broke in his expression, and suddenly he was pulling her down from the chair, pulling her into his arms, and Grace went willingly. His embrace was warm and strong and all-encompassing, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke and pine and something uniquely him. "I cannot offer you much," Zachary said into her hair, his voice ragged. "But what I have, what I am, it is yours if you want it. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you walk into my cabin half frozen and somehow you thaw something in me that I thought was dead. I do not want you to leave, Grace. God help me, I want you to stay." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face made her bold. She reached up with her bandaged hands and touched his bearded jaw, and Zachary's eyes fluttered closed at the contact. "Then I will stay," she said simply, "if you will have me." His eyes opened, blazing with an intensity that made her shiver, and then he was lowering his head, giving her time to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with a certainty that defied logic. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid he might break her. But Grace made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and Zachary's control shattered. His arms tightened around her, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, and he kissed her with a desperate hunger that she matched with her own. It was nothing like the chaste kisses Grace had received from suitors back in Kansas. This was raw and real and full of emotion, relief and longing, and the beginning of something deeper, something that felt inevitable and right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once I let myself love you, Grace, I will not be able to let you go. I need you to be sure." "I am sure," Grace said, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. "I am yours, Zachary Wolfe, for as long as you will have me." "Forever, then," he said, and kissed her again. They did not sleep much that night, though not for the reasons propriety would frown upon. They simply talked, sitting by the fire wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and promises. Zachary was adamant that he wanted to do things properly. He would take Grace down to Rock Springs, introduce himself to her aunt, explain the situation. If her aunt approved, he would court Grace properly, come down from the mountain regularly to see her. And when spring came, if Grace still wanted him, they would marry. "I want you now," Grace protested. "Why wait?" "Because I want to give you time to be sure," Zachary said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And because I will not have people thinking I took advantage of you, that you only stayed with me because you had no choice. I want everyone to know that you chose me freely, with a clear head and full knowledge of what you were getting into." Grace understood his reasoning even if she did not particularly like it. "Fine," she agreed, "but I will not change my mind. Spring might as well be tomorrow for all the difference it will make." Zachary smiled against her hair. "We will see. Now try to sleep. We have a long journey tomorrow." The trip down the mountain the next morning was slow going, the snow deep and treacherous in places. Zachary had bundled Grace onto his horse, a sturdy mountain-bred mare named Storm, while he walked ahead, breaking trail. Despite the cold and the difficulty of the journey, Grace found herself almost wishing it would take longer, not wanting this time with Zachary to end. But eventually, Rock Springs came into view, a small but bustling town nestled in a valley between the mountains. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and Grace could hear the sounds of civilization: dogs barking, men shouting, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Zachary led them straight to Martha's place, a two-story building on Main Street that looked well-maintained and welcoming. Before Grace could dismount, the front door flew open and a woman rushed out, tall and sturdy, with graying blonde hair and eyes the same green as Grace's. "Grace," the woman called, her voice full of disbelief. "Grace Carlisle." "Aunt Martha," Grace replied, and then she was being helped down from the horse by both Zachary and her aunt, and Martha was pulling her into a fierce hug. "We heard about the stage robbery," Martha said, her voice breaking. "They said everyone was dead or missing. I thought I had lost you before I even got to meet you properly." "I nearly died," Grace admitted, "but Mr. Wolfe saved me." She turned to where Zachary stood, holding Storm's reins, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the emotional scene unfolding. "Aunt Martha, this is Zachary Wolfe. He found me during the blizzard and tended my frostbite. I would have died without him." Martha turned to Zachary, and her assessment was quick and thorough. Grace could see her aunt taking in his size, his rough appearance, the way he was carefully not looking at Grace with the intensity she could feel thrumming between them. Martha was no fool. She had run a boarding house for 5 years, had dealt with all manner of men, and Grace watched her aunt's expression shift from gratitude to understanding to something that might have been approval. "Mr. Wolfe," Martha said, extending her hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. Thank you for saving my niece." Zachary shook her hand, his own dwarfing Martha's. "No debt owed, madam. I did what anyone would do." "We both know that is not true," Martha said shrewdly, "but I appreciate your modesty. Come inside, both of you." "Mr. Wolfe, I insist you stay for lunch at least. I want to hear the whole story." Over the next hour, sitting in Martha's comfortable kitchen with hot coffee and fresh bread, Zachary told Martha everything: finding Grace at his door, the severity of her frostbite, the long night of keeping her hands warm, the 2 days recovering in his cabin. He was careful, Grace noticed, to present everything in a way that made it clear he had been a perfect gentleman, that Grace's reputation was intact. Martha listened carefully, asking occasional questions, her sharp eyes moving between Grace and Zachary. When the story was done, she sat back in her chair and regarded them both. "And now?" she asked. "What happens now?" Grace looked at Zachary, who looked at her. Then together, they told Martha about their feelings, about their intention to court properly, about wanting to marry in the spring if Martha approved. "You have known each other 3 days," Martha pointed out, but her tone was not disapproving, merely cautious. "I know," Grace said. "I know it sounds mad, but Aunt Martha, I have never been more certain of anything. Zachary is a good man, the best man I have ever known, and I love him." It was the first time she had said the words out loud, and she heard Zachary's sharp intake of breath beside her. She reached over and took his hand, threading her bandaged fingers through his larger ones. "I love him," she repeated, looking at Zachary now. "I know it is fast, but I do." "I love you too," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "Did not think I was capable of it anymore, but I do." "I love you, Grace." Martha watched them, and slowly a smile spread across her face. "Well," she said, "I have seen marriages based on far less start out, and I have seen courtships of years end in disaster. If you two are sure, if you truly love each other, then you have my blessing. But," she held up a finger, "I want a proper courtship. Mr. Wolfe, you will come down from your mountain at least once a week to visit Grace. You will sit in my parlor like respectable people, and there will be no living together until you are properly wed. Agreed?" "Agreed," Zachary said immediately, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, madam. I promise to do right by Grace." "See that you do," Martha said, but her tone was warm. "Now, Grace, let me see those hands. I have some experience with frostbite, and I want to make sure they are healing properly." The next months were both wonderful and agonizing for Grace. True to his word, Zachary came down from the mountain every week, and they spent long hours in Martha's parlor, talking and laughing and falling more in love with each visit. He brought her gifts from the mountain, a necklace carved from elk horn, soft rabbit furs to keep her warm, pine boughs that filled her room with their sweet scent. Grace's hands healed slowly but completely. The doctor Martha brought in to examine them declared it a miracle, said he had rarely seen such severe frostbite heal without losing at least some fingers. Grace knew it was Zachary's patient care through that long night that had saved them, and she was grateful every day. She helped Martha run the boarding house, learning the business and proving herself capable. She made friends in Rock Springs, became part of the community. But her favorite days were always the ones when Zachary would ride into town, when she would look out the window and see him on Storm, his long hair pulled back, his broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snows melted, revealing the landscape beneath. Wildflowers began to bloom in the valleys and the aspens started to bud, and as the land renewed itself, so too did Zachary. Grace watched him slowly open up, become more comfortable around people, smile more readily. He was still quiet, still preferred the mountain to town, but he was no longer hiding, no longer running from his past. In early May, when the mountain passes were clear and the weather warm, Zachary came down to Rock Springs with a ring he had made himself, the band carved from a single piece of silver he had traded furs for. He got down on one knee in Martha's parlor, with her aunt as witness, and asked Grace properly to be his wife. Grace's answer was yes before he even finished the question. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Rock Springs. Grace wore a dress Martha had helped her make, simple but beautiful in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Zachary wore new clothes, bought specially for the occasion, though he had stubbornly refused to cut his hair, saying Grace liked it long and that was the only opinion that mattered to him. Martha cried through the entire ceremony. Half the town turned out to see the mountain man marry the girl he had saved from the blizzard. It had become something of a local legend, the story of Grace's arrival and Zachary's all-night vigil warming her frostbitten fingers. People called it romantic, called it fate, called it a miracle. Grace just called it love. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at Martha's boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Grace had never seen Zachary look so uncomfortable as when she pulled him onto the makeshift dance floor, but he went willingly, holding her carefully as they swayed to the fiddle music. "Happy," he murmured into her hair as they danced. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Grace replied honestly. "You, terrified," Zachary admitted, and she pulled back to look at him in surprise. He gave her a crooked smile. "I am about to take you up to that cabin and ask you to make a life with me in the middle of nowhere. I am scared I cannot give you everything you deserve." "You are everything I deserve," Grace said firmly. "You are everything I want. The cabin, the mountain, the hard work, I want all of it as long as I am with you. I am going to hold you to that when you are chopping wood in the snow," Zachary teased, and Grace laughed, reaching up to kiss him right there in front of everyone. When they finally left the celebration, riding up the mountain together with Storm and a pack mule loaded with gifts and supplies from the townspeople, Grace felt nothing but joy. This was her life now, her choice, and it was everything she wanted. The cabin looked different somehow when they arrived as the sun was setting. It was still small and rough, but Grace saw it with new eyes now, not as a temporary shelter but as her home. Their home. Zachary helped her down from Storm, and for a moment they just stood there, his hands on her waist, her hands on his shoulders. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wolfe," he said softly. "Home," Grace repeated, and the word had never sounded so perfect. That night, as they lay together in Zachary's bed, their bed now with the fire burning low and the sounds of the mountains settling in around them, Grace traced the scars on Zachary's chest, the evidence of his past written on his skin. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Coming up here, isolating yourself for so long?" Zachary caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss her palm, right where he had held it that first night. "I used to think the mountain saved my life," he said. "Gave me space to heal, to find peace. But now I know it was not the mountain at all. It was waiting for you. The mountain was just where I needed to be so that when you stumbled out of that blizzard, I would be there to catch you." "You believe in fate?" Grace asked, surprised. Zachary had always seemed so practical, so grounded in the physical world. "I did not," he admitted. "But how else do you explain it? You getting lost, ending up at my cabin out of all the places you could have gone, me being there, knowing what to do to save your hands. If any one thing had been different, we never would have met. So yes, I believe in fate now, or at least I believe that some things are meant to be." Grace curled closer to him, resting her head over his heart, listening to its steady beat. "I love you," she said. "I love our life. I love this mountain. I love everything about this." "I love you too," Zachary said, his arms tightening around her. "More than I thought I could love anything. You brought me back to life, Grace. You made me remember what it means to be human, to connect with someone, to care about something other than just surviving." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Grace's last thought before dreams claimed her was that she had never felt so safe, so loved, so completely home. The first year of their marriage was full of learning and adjustment. Grace had to adapt to the rhythms of mountain life, the early mornings, the constant work, the isolation. There were days when it was hard, when she missed the easy companionship of the boarding house, when the silence of the mountain felt oppressive rather than peaceful. But there were far more days when it was perfect. days when she and Zachary would hike together through the high meadows, and he would teach her the names of plants and how to read animal tracks. Days when they would work side by side, her tending the expanded garden while he repaired fences or checked traps. Evenings spent by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the books Martha sent up regularly, or simply talking about everything and nothing. And the nights. The nights were always perfect, wrapped in each other's arms, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal passion. Zachary had worried that Grace would grow to resent the hardship of mountain life, but she proved herself more capable than even she had expected. She learned to shoot, becoming proficient with the rifle Zachary gave her for protection when he was away checking his trap lines. She learned to preserve food to tan hides, to predict weather by watching the sky and the behavior of animals. She grew strong, her hands calloused from work, her body lean and tough. But she never lost her gentleness, her kindness, and Zachary told her often that she had brought warmth to the mountain that had nothing to do with the weather. They made the trip down to Rock Springs once a month, sometimes more often when weather and work allowed. Martha was always thrilled to see them, and Grace made sure to help at the boarding house when she was in town, not wanting her aunt to feel abandoned. Zachary, for his part, became something of a local figure respected for his skills and knowledge, sought out for advice on surviving in the high country, gradually accepted by the townspeople despite his continued preference for solitude. In their second year of marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Zachary. When she finally did, choosing a quiet evening by the fire when the world felt peaceful and safe, Zachary's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He went very still, his dark eyes searching her face. "You are sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am sure," Grace confirmed, taking his hand and placing it on her belly, which did not yet show any sign of the life growing within. "We are going to have a baby." Zachary's hand spread across her stomach, large and warm and protective, and when he looked up at her, there were tears in his eyes. "I did not think," he said, his voice breaking. "After the war, after everything, I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a family. Grace, you have given me everything." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her so carefully as if she was made of glass. Grace laughed, the sound joyful. "I am not fragile, Zachary. I am just pregnant." "You are carrying our child," he said, and there was such wonder in his voice. "That makes you the most precious thing in the world to me. I am going to take care of you, protect you, make sure you have everything you need." And he did. As Grace's pregnancy progressed, Zachary became almost comically protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, barely let her lift anything heavier than a bucket of water. He fretted over her constantly, making sure she ate enough, rested enough, stayed warm enough. Grace found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. "I am not made of glass," she reminded him regularly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But Zachary's concern came from love, and Grace understood that. He had lost so much in his life friends in the war, years to isolation and grief. This child represented hope and future in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. As Grace's due date approached, Zachary made the difficult decision to take her down to Rock Springs. "I know you want to have the baby here," he said, and Grace could see how much the decision cost him. "But if something goes wrong, if there are complications, I could not live with myself. Martha has access to a doctor to help. Please, Grace. For me. We will go to Rock Springs for the birth and then we can come home." Grace agreed, understanding his fear even if she did not share it. She felt strong and healthy, believed the birth would be fine, but she could not deny Zachary this peace of mind. So in late autumn of their second year of marriage, they rode down to Rock Springs and moved into a room at Martha's boarding house. Martha was delighted to have them, and immediately began fussing over Grace almost as much as Zachary did. Grace's labor started on a cold November night, almost exactly 2 years after the night she had stumbled to Zachary's door with frostbite on her fingers. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary, pacing the hallway outside the room where Martha and the doctor attended Grace, thought his heart might actually break from fear. But Grace was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for, and when dawn broke the next morning, the sound of a baby's cry filled the boarding house. Zachary was allowed in to find Grace, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A son," she said, her voice hoarse but happy. "We have a son, Zachary." Zachary approached the bed as if in a dream, looking down at the impossibly small baby in Grace's arms. He had dark hair already, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were dark like Zachary's. "He is perfect," Zachary breathed. "You are perfect. Grace, I do not have words." "Then do not use words," Grace said, shifting over in the bed despite the doctor's protests that she should rest. "Come hold your son." Zachary had held newborn animals, had carried injured friends from battlefields, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of his son being placed in his massive arms. The baby was so small, so fragile, and Zachary was terrified he might accidentally hurt him. But the baby settled against his chest as if he belonged there, and Zachary felt something break open inside him, a last wall he had been holding onto, a final piece of armor against the world. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick. "I am your father. And I promise you, I will protect you and love you and make sure you never doubt that you are wanted. You are the best thing I never knew I needed." They named him Matthias, after Zachary's father who had died when Zachary was young. Matthias Wolfe, born into the Colorado mountains, loved from his first breath. The weeks after Matthias's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Grace recovered well from the birth, and Zachary proved to be a surprisingly adept father, patient with the baby's constant needs, never complaining about the crying or the mess or the exhaustion. He would walk the floor with Matthias for hours when the baby was fussy, his deep voice rumbling lullabies he barely remembered from his own childhood. When spring came, they returned to the mountain cabin, now a family of 3. Zachary had spent the winter months, when he could leave Grace and Matthias long enough, improving the cabin, adding a room that would serve as a nursery when Matthias was old enough, building a proper cradle, making everything as safe and comfortable as he could for his wife and child. Life on the mountain took on a new rhythm. The work remained hard, but it was laced with joy now, Matthias's gurgles and cries providing a constant soundtrack, his tiny presence transforming the cabin from just a shelter into a true home. Grace would prop him in a basket while she worked in the garden, and Zachary would carry him in a sling Grace had made when he went to check nearby trap lines, talking to the baby constantly about the mountain and the animals and the sky. "He cannot understand you," Grace teased once, watching Zachary have an involved conversation with 6-month-old Matthias about the best way to track elk. "He understands tone," Zachary countered, adjusting the baby in his arms. "And besides, it is never too early to start his education." Grace just smiled, her heart full. This life, this love, this family, it was more than she had ever dreamed possible that frozen night when she had collapsed at Zachary's door. The years passed, marked by Matthias's growth and development. He took his first steps while Zachary was outside chopping wood, and Grace's delighted shout brought him running, convinced something was wrong, only to find his son toddling across the cabin floor with a determined expression on his tiny face. Matthias spoke his first word at 10 months, Dada, which made Zachary tear up despite his best efforts to maintain his stoic mountain man facade. When Matthias was 2, Grace became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when Grace went into labor on a summer evening, Zachary was able to assist the midwife they had brought up from Rock Springs in advance. Their daughter was born at sunset, small and perfect, with Grace's green eyes and blonde hair. They named her Sarah, and Zachary proved just as devoted to his daughter as he had been to his son. If anything, having a daughter softened him even more. This tiny girl who had him wrapped around her little finger from the moment she first gripped his finger in her small hand. "You are getting soft, mountain man," Grace teased him once, watching him rock baby Sarah to sleep with infinite patience. "Only with the people I love," Zachary replied, not the least bit ashamed. "The rest of the world can think what it wants. My family gets the best of me." Life was good. Hard, but good. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There was the year the early freeze killed most of their garden, and they had to rely heavily on Zachary's hunting skills to get through winter. There was the spring when Matthias, at age 4, wandered off into the woods and gave them both a scare that lasted hours until Zachary tracked him down, safe but very sorry, at a beaver pond half a mile from the cabin. There was the winter when Grace came down with pneumonia, and Zachary barely slept for a week, tending to her constantly, terrified of losing her, until finally the fever broke and she began to recover. But there were far more good times than bad. Summer evenings with the whole family sitting outside the cabin, watching the stars emerge one by one. Winter nights with everyone piled together in the warmth of the cabin, reading stories or playing simple games. Spring mornings with Matthias and Sarah helping Grace in the expanded garden while Zachary worked nearby, always within sight, always watching over his family. Matthias grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build and temperament. He was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when out in the woods learning tracking and hunting from Zachary. Sarah was more outgoing, more social, loving the monthly trips to Rock Springs where she could play with other children and hear stories from her Aunt Martha. When Matthias was 6 and Sarah was 4, Grace became pregnant a third time. She was 30 years old now, Zachary 36, and they both felt blessed beyond measure to be growing their family again. "Are you hoping for a boy or girl?" Grace asked Zachary one evening, his hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby was kicking actively. "Healthy," Zachary said immediately. "That is all I hope for. Boy or girl does not matter, just healthy and born safe with you coming through it strong." Grace reached up to touch his bearded face, now threaded with silver. "I am strong," she reminded him, "and I have you, we will be fine." And they were. Their second daughter was born in early winter during the first snow of the season. She came into the world squalling lustily, with her father's dark hair and a determined expression that made both her parents laugh despite their exhaustion. They named her Elizabeth, and she completed their family in a way none of them had realized was missing. Where Matthias was quiet and Sarah was outgoing, Elizabeth was fierce and independent, a force of nature from her earliest days. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Zachary built an addition with Matthias helping, the boy now old enough to be truly useful with the work. They added 2 more rooms, giving the children space of their own while still keeping the family close together. Martha came up to visit when she could, amazed each time at the life Grace and Zachary had built. "You have done well for yourself, niece," she said during one summer visit, watching Grace in the garden while Zachary played with the children nearby. "I was worried at first, I will admit. Thought maybe you were rushing into things, but I was wrong. This is exactly where you were meant to be." Grace hugged her aunt tightly. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "And thank you for giving Zachary and me your blessing. I cannot imagine my life any other way now." As the children grew older, they began taking on more responsibilities on the mountain. Matthias became his father's shadow, learning everything Zachary could teach him about surviving and thriving in the high country. Sarah developed a talent for healing, learning about medicinal plants from both Grace and Martha, talking about maybe becoming a nurse one day. Elizabeth, still young, showed signs of being a natural horsewoman, fearless on storm despite her small size. The mountain that had once been Zachary's refuge from the world had become something else entirely, a home full of life and love and laughter. The silence he had once sought was now filled with children's voices, with Grace's singing as she worked, with the sounds of family. And Zachary, the man who had once thought himself broken beyond repair, who had hidden in the mountains to escape his pain, had discovered that healing came not from isolation but from connection, from loving and being loved, from taking the risk to open his heart again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grace and Zachary left the children with Martha for a few days and rode back up to the cabin alone. It felt strange to be there without Matthias's steady presence, without Sarah's chatter, without Elizabeth's boundless energy. But it was also lovely to have time together, just the two of them, remembering what had brought them together in the first place. That night, lying in bed with Grace in his arms, Zachary thought back to the man he had been 10 years ago. Alone, isolated, convinced that solitude was safety. He had been surviving but not living, existing but not thriving. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, tilting her head back to look at him. "About how lucky I am," Zachary said honestly. "About how you saved me just as much as I saved you that night." Grace turned in his arms to face him fully. "We saved each other," she corrected. "I was lost in more ways than one when I stumbled to your door. You gave me safety and warmth and love. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. We both got exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it." "Fate," Zachary said, echoing their conversation from years ago. "Fate," Grace agreed and kissed him. The years continued to pass, bringing the expected joys and sorrows of life. Martha passed away peacefully when Sarah was 12, and the whole family mourned the loss of the woman who had blessed their union and loved them all so fiercely. They inherited the boarding house, and after much discussion, decided to hire a manager to run it while using the income to improve their mountain homestead and save for the children's futures. Matthias, at 16, made his first solo hunting trip into the deep wilderness, returning a week later with elk meat, and a new maturity that made both his parents simultaneously proud and wistful for the boy he had been. Sarah, at 14, began spending summers in Rock Springs apprenticing with the doctor there. Her healing skills impressive enough that talk began of her going east for formal training when she was older. Elizabeth, at 12, was already being courted by every boy in the valley, despite her parents' insistence that she was far too young for such things. Through it all, Grace and Zachary remained each other's anchors. They still made time for each other, still prioritized their relationship even as the demands of family and work pulled at them. They would take walks together in the early mornings before the children woke, would sit together by the fire long after the kids had gone to bed, would steal kisses and touches throughout the day like newlyweds. "I love you more now than I did 10 years ago," Grace told Zachary on their 15th anniversary. "I did not think that was possible, but it is. Every day with you makes me love you more. The feeling is entirely mutual, Zachary assured her, pulling her close. You are my heart, Grace. Everything good in my life comes back to you. When Matthias turned 18, he announced his intention to build his own cabin on the far side of the mountain. Not to leave, he assured his parents, seeing their expressions. Just to have my own place. I am a man now. It is time. Zachary understood, even though part of him wanted to protest. This was how it worked, children growing up and making their own paths. He helped Matthias select a site and begin building, and by the time summer ended, his son had a small but sturdy cabin of his own. It was only an hour's ride from the main homestead, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to give Matthias the independence he craved. Sarah left for nursing school in Denver when she was 19, and her absence was keenly felt. But she wrote faithfully every week and came home whenever she could, full of stories about her studies and the city. She graduated 3 years later, and to everyone's surprise, returned to Rock Springs to work with the doctor there rather than staying in Denver. The city is exciting, she explained to her parents, but it is not home. These mountains, these people, this is where I want to be, where I can do the most good. Elizabeth proved the wildest of the 3 children. She refused to be constrained by expectations of what a young lady should be, spending more time on horseback than in skirts, racing with the boys and generally causing her parents equal parts pride and exasperation. But she had a good heart and fierce loyalty, and Zachary suspected she would find her own path in her own time. Grace and Zachary grew older gracefully, their hair going silver, their faces weathered but happy. The hard work of mountain life kept them strong, and they remained healthy and active even as they entered their 50s. The cabin had become a true homestead now, with the main house and several outbuildings, a large garden, and even a small barn for the horses and other animals they had acquired over the years. They had become something of local legends in Rock Springs, the mountain man and the woman he had saved from the blizzard, who had built a life of love against the odds. Young couples would seek them out sometimes, asking for advice on marriage, on building a life together, on making love last. Grace and Zachary's advice was always the same. Choose each other every day. When things are hard, choose each other. When things are easy, choose each other. And never forget that you are on the same team facing the world together. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party that filled the main cabin and spilled out onto the porch. Matthias was there with his new bride, a quiet girl from Rock Springs who fit perfectly into the mountain life. Sarah came from town with several friends, including a young lawyer she seemed quite taken with. Elizabeth, now 21, arrived on a magnificent horse she had somehow convinced someone to sell her, already planning her next adventure. As Grace looked around at her family, at the life she and Zachary had built together, she felt overwhelming gratitude. 25 years ago, she had been lost and freezing, literally at death's door. Now she was surrounded by love and life and laughter, in a home she had made with a man she loved more than she had words to express. Zachary came up behind her, wrapping his still strong arms around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Wolfe," he murmured in her ear. Grace leaned back against his solid chest, still marveling after 25 years at how perfectly she fit against him. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Wolfe. Thank you for warming my frozen fingers that night. Thank you for warming my frozen heart." "Thank you for stumbling to my door," Zachary replied. "Thank you for seeing past the rough mountain man to the person underneath. Thank you for choosing me, choosing this life, choosing us." "I would choose you in every lifetime," Grace said, turning in his arms to face him. "In every possible world. You are my person, Zachary Wolfe. You always have been from that very first night." They kissed then, surrounded by family and friends, no longer young but still deeply in love. And if Grace closed her eyes, she could still feel it, that first moment when Zachary's hands had taken her frozen fingers between his palms, and warmth had begun to spread through her body and soul. That moment when everything had changed, when her real life had begun. The party continued around them, full of joy and celebration. But for Grace and Zachary, the most important thing was right there, each other, still choosing each other after 25 years, still committed to their love and their life together. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Grace and Zachary stood together on the porch of their cabin, watching their family laugh and celebrate below. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not gotten lost in that blizzard?" Zachary asked. Grace considered. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if I would have made it to my aunt's, what my life in Rock Springs would have been like. But I cannot truly imagine it. This life with you feels like the only life I was ever meant to have." "I know exactly what my life would have been like without you," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "Empty, cold, lonely. You brought warmth to my mountain, Grace. You brought life. You brought love. I was just existing before you, now I am living." "We are living," Grace corrected. "Together, the way it was always meant to be." They stood there as the stars began to emerge overhead, the sounds of their family celebrating behind them, and felt nothing but contentment. The mountains stretched out before them, beautiful and wild and home. This was their place, their life, built on a foundation of love that had started with a desperate woman freezing in a blizzard and a lonely man who knew how to warm frozen fingers with his own hands. But those hands had warmed more than just fingers that night. They had warmed hearts, built bridges, created family, and nurtured love. And that love had grown and flourished and become something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations to come. As the years continued to pass, Grace and Zachary remained devoted to each other and their family. They became grandparents when Matthias and his wife had their first child, a boy they named Zachary after his grandfather. The joy of holding that baby, of seeing their legacy continue, was overwhelming for both of them. More grandchildren followed. Matthias and his wife had 3 children in all, while Sarah eventually married her lawyer and had twin girls. Even Elizabeth, who everyone thought would remain forever wild and free, surprised everyone by falling in love with a horse rancher from Wyoming and settling down to have a family of her own. The main cabin, built so long ago by Zachary's hands, became the gathering place for the whole extended family. Holidays would find it bursting with people, with children running everywhere and adults catching up and love filling every corner. Grace would cook for days preparing feasts, and Zachary would tell stories to the grandchildren about the old days, about the mountain, about the night he opened his door to find their grandmother half frozen on his porch. The children loved that story best of all, the romance and drama of it, and they would beg to hear it again and again. Each time, Zachary would glance over at Grace and their eyes would meet, and the love between them would be so evident that even the youngest child could see it. Grace and Zachary aged together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp, their love never wavering. They still took their morning walks together when weather permitted, still sat by the fire in the evenings, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of youth had evolved into something deeper, richer, a connection that transcended the physical, a bond that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. When they celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Grace took a moment to pull Zachary aside, away from the celebration. They walked to the spot where she had collapsed that long-ago night, now marked by a small wooden bench Zachary had built years ago. They sat together, Grace's head on Zachary's shoulder, his arm around her waist. 40 years, Grace marveled. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true, I think, Zachary said. His voice was older now, rougher, but still the same voice that had promised to take care of her that first night. Every day with you has been a gift, Grace. The best years of my life have been the ones with you in them. We built something good, did we not? Grace asked, looking back toward the cabin where their family celebrated. Out of something that could have been tragic, me freezing to death in a blizzard, we built all of this. All this love and life and family. We built something extraordinary, Zachary agreed. And it all started with you being brave enough to keep walking, to keep fighting to make it to my door, and me being lucky enough to be home when you knocked. Grace smiled, reaching up to touch his face, now deeply lined but still beloved. Fate, she said. We were always meant to find each other, I am sure of it. Fate, Zachary echoed and kissed her forehead gently. They sat there for a long time, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for 40 years. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, their legacy, the love they had created together manifesting in the laughter and joy of their descendants. I have no regrets, Grace said finally. Not about choosing you, not about this life, not about any of it. If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing. Neither would I, Zachary said, holding her closer. You are my heart, Grace Wolfe. You have been since that first night, and you will be until my last breath. And beyond, Grace added. Our love goes beyond breath, beyond life. It is woven into this mountain now, into this land, into our family. It will last long after we are gone. They sat together until the stars came out, until someone from the cabin came looking for them to cut the anniversary cake. But neither of them would ever forget that moment sitting together, 40 years after their improbable beginning, still so deeply in love, still so grateful for the chance encounter that had changed everything. Grace and Zachary Wolfe lived many more years together on their mountain, growing old with grace and dignity, surrounded by family and love. And when they eventually passed, first Zachary and then Grace just a few months later, their legend lived on. The story of the mountain man who warmed frozen fingers all night, and the brave woman who captured his heart became family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The cabin they had built together remained standing, maintained lovingly by their descendants, a testament to their love and the life they had created. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howled through the Colorado mountains, people swore they could feel a warmth emanating from that old cabin, not just the heat from the fireplace, but something deeper, more profound. The warmth of a love so strong it transcended death itself. The warmth of two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The warmth of a mountain man's hands, holding frozen fingers, promising safety and care and love. A promise that had been kept for 45 years, until death parted them in body but never in spirit. Their descendants continued to thrive, carrying forward the values Grace and Zachary had instilled: hard work, fierce love, choosing each other, building something lasting. The mountain remained home to generations of Wolfes, each adding their own chapter to the family story, but always coming back to that beginning, to that night when everything changed. Because that night, when Grace Carlisle arrived at Zachary Wolfe's cabin with frostbite on her fingers, and he warmed them between his palms all night, was not just the story of a rescue. It was the story of two souls finding home in each other, of love emerging from hardship, of fate bringing together two people who were always meant to be. It was, quite simply, the story of true love, the kind that lasts forever,